Good afternoon. Welcome to the Government House Weekly Press Briefing. Today is September 16th, 2019. We'll begin today with a weather update. We are monitoring a weather system in the Central Atlantic, and so I want to start by providing an update on that this morning, or this afternoon rather. From the National Hurricane Center, they're reporting that showers and thunderstorms have increased this morning in association with a small low-pressure system located over the central tropic Atlantic. The satellite data from the National Hurricane Center also indicates that the low pressure system has become better defined, and environmental conditions are expected to be conducive for the formation of a tropical depression later this week or over the next coming days. While not currently under any warnings or advisories, we continue to encourage the Virgin Islands residents to continue taking necessary precautions and to continue to ensure that they are prepared. We know all too well the unpredictability of these weather systems, and there's also a risk for no-notice weather events. So make sure that we stay prepared. And one of the ways that you can ensure that is by going to the VITEMA website. They have quite a number of resources there. You could check the different checklists there, and also, more importantly, be sure to sign up for VI alerts from the VITEMA's website. It's vitema.vi.gov, and also pay attention to local weather advisories on the different radio stations. So today also, we know that September marks the 2-year anniversary of both Hurricanes Irma and Maria. The Brian Roach administration is continuing to move forward on the recovery and rebuilding effort. And here today, we are joined by the Director of the Office of Disaster Recovery, Mrs. Adrienne Williams-Octolin, the Executive Director of the Virgin Islands Housing Finance Authority, Mr. Darrell Griffith, also the Commissioner of the Department of Public Works, Mr. Nelson Petty, and the Executive Director of the Water and Power Authority, Mr. Nelson Kupfer. They will provide some updates on some of those recovery projects and some other items or some other issues of concern regarding those respective agencies with the public. So without further delay, I will turn over to Ms. Adrienne Williams-Octolin.
And thank you, Mr. Motor, and good afternoon, everyone. As Mr. Motor mentioned, that this is the week that we mark the 2-year anniversary of Hurricane Maria. And the messages that we're sending is the recovery is on its way. We have made some significant accomplishments this last week in terms of some of the opportunities that are available to the territory to help move the recovery forward. I think it's very important to note that the coordination of all of these federal resources that we have in the territory is no small feat. There are regulations that have to be complied with. Then also when we join these projects together and these funding sources together, it makes the compliance even more complicated. But we are working together. The Office of Disaster Recovery is the center for all things recovery, and we consistently ensure that the territory is prepared to meet these requirements. Of the $8 billion that the territory expects to receive through the various programs, the FEMA program as well as the CDBG-DR program funded through HUD and the Federal Highway Emergency Relief Program funded through the Department of Transportation, we have about $1.9 million that has been expended to date for FEMA funds. Additionally, we now have access to $243 million from Tranche 1 of CDBG-DR, and the territory is working to expend that, as well as we have funding through the Federal Highway Emergency Relief Program that we have over $40 million that has already been obligated. We consistently work together with all of the agencies, the Department of Public Works, along with all the semi-autonomous instrumentalities as the Water and Power Authority, as well as the Virgin Islands Housing Finance Authority for the coordination of all of these funds and on these projects. Governor Bryan has identified the top priority projects for the recovery. And the number one project is the temporary facility at the Wong F. Louis Hospital, of which we are working very closely with Wong F. Louis to ensure that this temporary facility comes online by the spring of 2020. The structure is in place, and we recently received notice of the obligations for the furniture, fixtures, and equipment that would allow the outfit of the hospital, bringing much release to that distressed facility. This is, again, one of the top priorities for the administration, followed closely by our schools, in which we continue to work with FEMA to identify what are the industry standards that we're able to rebuild the schools to. This has been a discussion that has been moving along for some time with FEMA because of the opportunities that have been provided to us with the Bipartisan Budget Act. The Bipartisan Budget Act gave certain considerations for Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, and the territory has been awaiting the guidance from FEMA to be able to access those opportunities. What that relates to from our end is that there's a significant delay in our opportunity to provide, get the damage descriptions done for the schools that would aid a rebuilding. We have seen some significant progress over this week, and we hope to ensure that the schools again are rebuilt timely. These also followed by our roads, which Commissioner Petty will provide an update on, and again strengthening our infrastructure, our water, our power, and our wastewater systems that will have again provide for rebuilding and resiliency. The Office of Disaster Recovery continues to work closely with all of the federal partners, because navigating through the federal maze is not a simple process, but we have close coordination with all of the agencies to ensure that we build a capacity in the territory to manage federal projects and also the funding. The Office of Disaster Recovery has established a number of workshops and also identified resources that's out there to help build a capacity within our government entities to manage federal funds. We also ensure that we work towards transparency and understanding how much money the territory has been obligated and what is the rate of expenditure of these funds, as well as the projects for which they'll be allocated to. And we encourage the residents of the territory, as well as the media and any other stakeholders out there, to visit our website at www.usviodr.com. That will provide you up-to-date information on the status of the recovery projects, the recovery priorities, and the recovery funding. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Darrell Griffith, the Executive Director of the Virgin Islands Housing Finance Authority. And today I want to give you a brief update on the Community Development Block Grant and the three different tranches that have been allocated to the territory. As most people know, the territory was allocated $1.8 billion in Community Development Block Grant for disaster recovery and mitigation. And of those $1.8 billion, they were broken into four different tranches. The first tranche, as Mrs. Octilin mentioned, was for Tranche 1, CDBG-DR, disaster recovery, was for $242 million. And the territory does have access to all of those funds to now begin its projects. The second tranche is for $779 million. The territory created an action plan for that tranche, which was approved by HUD, and now we're waiting on HUD to give us the grant agreement so that we can have access to the second tranche as we do for the first. The territory has done all of its parts towards those funds. Now we're just awaiting HUD to give us the grant agreement for the governor to sign so that we can get access to those funds. Now the third tranche is the much talked about tranche in last month, in which HUD secretary talked about maybe a delay for Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. We're happy to report that the Virgin Islands did receive its Federal Register notice for Tranche 3 for CDBG mitigation for $774 million. What that means is that the work now starts. The same things we did for Tranche 1 and Tranche 2, the territory now has to create an action plan, and then we submit that action plan to HUD, and then HUD gets a chance to review it, and once approved by HUD, the territory gets access to it. And this action plan, like the previous two, we're going to go out to the community and ask for community input. And we're going to be very aggressive in this community input because in the first two, we did a series of meetings and we didn't get the turnout that we wanted from the community. And so now I'm going to ask you all in the media to make sure that when we send out those notices, if you can help us spread the word near and far, because we want the community to be intricately involved in this process, because it's only with your input can we make this plan as comprehensive as it needs to be. And I'm going to introduce one more acronym to our lexicon now. For tranches 1 and 2, we said it was CDBG DR, that's CDBG, Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Funds. Now for tranche 3, we're going to be calling it CDBG MIT. So that's Community Development Block Grant Mitigation. So this is going to be the new term that we're going to be using to differentiate between tranches 1 and 2 and tranche 3. And the big difference between mitigation and disaster recovery is that mitigation is for those projects that are not exactly tied to what happened to the disaster, but mitigation is to make the Virgin Islands stronger and more resilient for upcoming storms. So that's the big difference between the two. Also, I want to speak about the Envision Tomorrow program, which is the home repair and reconstruction program underneath CDBG DR. So this is a program that's going to repair storm-damaged homes. Our first priority are those homes that are too damaged to get repaired underneath the previous program. The STEP program, or what it was called here, was the Emergency Home Repair Virgin Islands program. Now, this program has already received over 1,400 applicants. Over 1,400 individuals have registered for this program. And we have signed up over 29 local general contractors who are going to be participating in this program. But we have put out another RFQ, another request for qualifications, and we're asking all Virgin Island contractors and contractors who are registered to do business in the Virgin Islands to respond to this RFQ so that we can put you in the pool of contractors who will be able to receive work from this. You can look at the RFQ. The notices are in all of the local newspapers. They're also located at vihfa.gov. That's the Housing Finance Authority's website. Once again, it's www.vihfa.gov. And it's also located at the website of the usviodr.com too as well. So please, all contractors, take a look at this so that you can be involved in the recovery process. One of the great things about the CDBG funds, which are different from the FEMA funds, is that there's not the requirement that the territory has to pay first and then wait and then get reimbursed. With CDBG funds, we can use the grant money to pay on invoice. So all small, local, medium-sized, and big contractors know that once you send us an invoice, we can pay your invoice using the grant funds. That's a very big difference. And with that too as well, I'm going to close this by saying that we're making some very good progress. We have a number of local government entities that have completed the subrecipient application with the VIHFA. That means that they're on the cusp of ready to spend money and they can also start their procurement process. So we have WAPA, which is actively procuring for the 4 generators, in which we had the press conference last week. The subrecipient agreement was also received for the Department of Public Works. One was received for tourism, and also one was received for the Virgin Islands Housing Authority, our sister agency that does the public housing. On that note, I'll end and let Commissioner Petty talk to you about the DPW projects that are up and coming. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Following what Director Griffith said about the CDBG projects that are now ready to go, the first tranche allowed $30 million for projects to be run from the Department of Public Works. Those first 2 projects have been selected. It's the Dunu Bypass on St. Thomas and the North Side Road on St. Croix. We are in the process of designing that project and right now finalizing our project agreement with the VI Housing Finance Authority. Once final, we move to design and then on to construction. This project has heavy coordination with utility companies, WAPA, other private utilities, to ensure that once we go in these roads, we do it once. So the type of coordination we're doing doesn't happen overnight. It's very extensive. We have to have proper design, environmental assessments, and this takes time. So once completed, we will move forward to construction on these much-needed projects. Also, we've received funds from the Eastern Federal Lands, actually from the Federal Highway Department, managed by the Eastern Federal Lands Division out of Virginia. Currently, I have one project that's been awarded to a company out of Utah, and it's for 4 sites, Route 303 on Lindbergh Bay, Route 40 St. Peter Mountain Road, Route 37 on Hull Bay, and Route 10 Center Line Road in St. John. And that project total is for $3.5 million. Last week, we were afforded another $8.7 million was released by the Federal Highway Administration. And this actually covers more of the federally funded emergency relief program, which is about 84 projects that we've identified. And we've, like Director Octon said, we received $40 million so far, and as the money becomes available, they release them in these small tranches. Those funds actually were designated for traffic signal repairs and road repairs. On St. Croix, we've completed all the traffic signal repairs, and currently we've just started to replace many of the already operating signals on St. Thomas. One other aspect that we're pleased to talk about is the road standards that were recently adopted for local roads. And this is something that we've been waiting on for quite some time that has actually delayed the process for us moving forward with the FEMA-funded projects. This designation allows us to basically have a clear path for how we engineer and design our roads. It's going to be following the same process that we use on our federal routes. So now that we have this designation, we are going to have all the project worksheets recertified to ensure that those sound engineering principles and practices are in place. Lastly, one of the top 100 projects that the governor identified were the flood control projects. We have 3 projects that are now in the final stages of approval, 2 on St. Thomas and 1 on St. Croix. The LaGrange project on St. Croix is a $9.2 million project that's in that final stage, awaiting funding from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. They're going to manage that project directly. We just have project oversight. The other 2 projects, Turpentine Run and the Savannah Gut Flood Control projects, are projects that are valued around $130 million. And by December of this year, we expect the final report to be approved, and that will open the door for funding that is a result of the Bipartisan Budget Act. Mr. Cuffer.
Good afternoon, Larry Kupfer, Executive Director of Virgin Islands Water and Power Authority. I was asked to come by today and give an update on the outages we've been having the last few weeks here in the territory. And first I want to start out saying, WAPA understands that these outages are unacceptable and we are devoting significant resources to them. So yesterday we had some planned maintenance here in St. Croix to do some preventative maintenance on a transformer. We thought we could keep about 2/3 of our customers with power, but it turns out the protective logic did not allow us to keep a unit running. So it was an island-wide outage while we did the transformer repair, and once it was repaired, the generators were returned to service and power was restored about 11:45. Today in St. Thomas, we had a substation failure in the Long Bay area, or Donald Francois substation. We have 4 substations in St. Thomas, one in the East End, which was basically destroyed in Irma, and it's currently being rebuilt. Our second substation there in Long Bay, about half the equipment was damaged. Normally, substations have 2 100% systems, so if one fails, you still can keep the substation in service. However, that substation, half the equipment was damaged, so anytime there's a failure, we lose that entire substation until we can get it fixed. So that was done. They opened up the equipment, were able to repair it, and the plan was about 1:30 today to put the substation back in service, which would allow then full power to be restored to all the customers. 80 to 90% had been restored. They were still waiting on a couple other feeders based on finishing up this substation work. Now, as I think we put out a press release last week because we brought in some technical specialists from the New York Power Authority. We have been working with the New York Power Authority since the hurricanes. They've been providing us technical assistance on some of the projects that you heard about today, as well as some operating and technical help. And when we started to see these more frequent outages, we talked to their executive director and said, hey, we need some help. Can you send some down, some technical specialists who are specialists in generator controls and those types of operating systems? So they flew 3 people into the territory last Wednesday, and they've been working on the issue. We think we've narrowed it down to issues with 2 of our APR leased generators. And it could be a couple of issues. One, we know that there's a problem with the fuel system for these generators, such that when there's instability, these fuel pumps are not responding in order to keep the generators online. Plus, there's also some frequency excursions which are unrelated to the fuel pumps. But we think we've narrowed it down to these units, and so we hope there's going to be some short-term fixes to eliminate that instability and keep the power on steady state here in the territory. So, thank you.
I would like to now open the floor to questions from the media. So if you have a question, please identify your organization, state your name and identify your organization. Brandy Brooks, Virgin Islands Daily News.
Hi, good afternoon. My question is to Kupfer. Any idea as to how long it will take for these repairs? Of course, you guys said you narrowed it down for these repairs to actually.
Yeah, that's a difficult question to answer because we don't know all of the issues yet. We think, for instance, on the fuel pumps, it may be we need an uninterrupted UPS system on those pumps might help. But we're talking, a couple of weeks, not a couple of months or not a couple of years. So we think they're technical solutions that will not be long-term, but it might be a couple of weeks.
And in the meantime, for people who rely on electricity, especially on St. Thomas, where the outages aren't daily, and this is for anyone. So, for example, people who refrigerate insulin and things like that. Is there anything in place to make sure they don't run into too many issues? For the people who actually rely.
Yeah, and we have a Unit 23 in St. Thomas. That unit, we had a final part come in, and so we're getting ready to put into service, so it will be available for us. And also our Unit 14 is being prepped, so it will be available. So we will have more generators available in St. Thomas to help with these issues.
Susan Ellis, Virgin Islands Source. To Director Williams, Dr. please. When you talk about having capacity for industry standards for rebuilding the schools, is there a problem with what we're requesting, or what kind of delay is that going to cause?
So the Bipartisan Budget Act provided for the opportunity for us to rebuild schools not without pre-disaster condition. So that, very simply put, the necessary changes, typically what would happen on a regular disaster is that you would have to put the school back to what it was. That's what's afforded through the Stafford Act. But because of the Bipartisan Budget Act, we can also now fix items that were not damaged in the storms. And as a result of that, there's guidance that has to be provided by FEMA in order to utilize those opportunities through the Disaster Bipartisan Budget Act. And now what we're waiting on the approval from FEMA with the guidance that would allow us to start putting the schools back together. So it basically lets us say what's eligible to be rebuilt and how much money it will be provided for us to rebuild the schools to. So until we receive that, we're in a holding pattern, waiting for that guidance from FEMA in terms of the industry standards and what we're able to rebuild to.
So it may be a delay after all.
Well, it has been a delay. This has been going on since 2018, but I think we're closer to the end than we are to the beginning. The territory has submitted industry standards for consideration from FEMA, and FEMA has provided some feedback to us that we're still providing some additional information to them so that they can approve those standards, and that the next step after the standards are approved, that we'll begin to put together the fixed cost estimate, which is the total amount of money that the territory will receive to rebuild each school.
Great. Just one more quick question. Can you talk a little bit about how we are building capacity and transparency?
Yes. So we have been working with a number of government agencies that may, one, receive more federal funds than they typically receive, and looking at what their resources are to be able to manage those funds. These agencies are receiving funds from FEMA as well as CDBG-DR, and under the CDBG-DR program, they have to complete a capacity assessment. So they look at how they've performed before under other federal programs, if they have any issues, where are the gaps, do they have enough resources? So what the Office of Disaster Recovery is doing is to identifying where those gaps are, what types of resources. It could be staffing, it can be other technical assistance that can be provided either locally or through some of the federal partners, and devising that strategy for each particular agency, thereby increasing their ability to manage the funds that they're going to receive.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Lucita Knight, and I'm a reporter with St. Barabbas. Ms. Ossitan, I have a question for you. You specifically mentioned progress that was made this week in regards to schools, and I was just wondering if you can outline what that specific progress that was made this week.
So we submitted the industry standards that we'd like our schools to rebuild to, and we'd not heard anything from FEMA for a significant amount of time. But what we spoke to us about what are some of the specific issues that we can address, and we're hoping that we're able to move forward on that. We also received these baseline industry standards for all of the critical facilities, so that allows the territory to begin the discussion. It is not the complete answer, but while we were still in a holding pattern, we can actually start to put together the damage description and start the process, as opposed to standing and waiting until we get a response back.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Mr. Petty, I have 2 questions for you. Sir, I understand that the issue in St. Thomas that was holding up the new robots, the signals, the streetlight, is in a manufacturer shortage that was blamed on the 2017 hurricanes. I understand that there's a backlog across a bunch of states.
Yes.
You've noted progress, so that you're starting to move on the St. Thomas issue. Has that backlog been addressed? Do we have a supplier for those parts?
Yes, we do. Actually, they've started a number of sites on St. Thomas, and the initial work is installing pole bases, and that's quite an effort. You have to basically excavate, put in these bases, and then pour concrete. That's the first step, and then the poles can be erected in the mast arms. So the critical component that was on back order is the mast arms and poles. Those had to be fabricated to size, and not just off the shelf like the traffic signals. We've had the traffic signals, but it's the poles and mast arms.
Okay, so we have the poles and mast arms now.
Yes, the first set of deliveries have arrived, so we have first 10 intersections on St. Thomas that are going to be replaced, and then the second order is right behind of it. So it's 20 in the first order, so that should start picking up right now.
All right, perfect. Thank you. And my second question for you is, you're in charge of the signage throughout the territory, right?
Correct.
We don't have many signs in Christiansted or anywhere on island. A lot of them got knocked down in the storms. A lot of our intersections don't have stop signs. You don't have one-way signs in Christiansted. You haven't since 2017. When will that be rectified?
So the good news is that we've sent to Federal Highway for approval a signage project that's going to be territory-wide. That's going to cover all the federal routes initially. We also have a project locally that we'll be putting out to cover the local roads. So once approved, that will go out to bid in a fast track so we can start installing signs across the territory.
And do you maybe have an estimate on the time? Is that like another year or?
No. I would say within a 3-month period.
Awesome. Thank
All
you
right.
so much.
Thank you.
And Mr. Griffith, I just have a question for you, sir. In
Yes, sir.
the CDBG MIP funding, I understand that we have special requirements that weren't posed to the states. What are those special requirements and how is that affecting us?
The special requirements that are put on there are not different from what was put on actually for CDBG DR. They want to make sure that we have sufficient staff and sufficient contractors to assist in the managing of the program. So that's something where we already are actively hiring for individuals. So it's a nice cross intersection actually between DR and MIT. So we're on pace actually before the notice was published to have those necessary positions filled to have people to be able to fill that. So that's one of the requirements. Another of the requirements that put in that was different from the states was that they consider what's called a capital project, a project over $50 million in the states, and it has a lot more restrictions and it has a lot more rules associated with it. In the Virgin Islands, they've put that down to $25 million. So basically, we have to go through a lot more rules and put a lot more things on our bigger capital projects than the individuals in the states would have to do for a smaller dollar amount. So those are two of the key big differences between what's being done in the states and what's being done in the Virgin Islands. The great thing is that we did get a couple of weeks advance notice to see what the states had to do, and then we got our mitigation notice. So we're ahead of the game in basically preparing for it. You're welcome.
While you're there, Commissioner. I remember, I think a couple of weeks ago, you mentioned that you were looking for 100 contractors total. Is that still the number you're looking for?
That's still my goal number, and that's what I mentioned earlier in the press conference, that we put out that request for qualifications for contractors. So we'd love all available contractors, small, medium, and large general contractors, to look at that request for qualifications. It's going to be advertised in all our local newspapers. It's actually advertising now. It's on our website, www.vihfa.gov. Also on the Office of Disaster Recovery, usviodr.com. So all contractors, please take a look at that and apply for it, because it's going to be great work to basically rebuild the homes of people in the Virgin Islands. Thank you.
So I did want to shed some additional light on a question that was asked from the St. Croix Avis in terms of the good news. So your question was relative to schools, but overall, with the Disaster Relief Act that was passed earlier this year, 2019, basically provided clearer guidance and authorities for the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. And we have been waiting for that guidance to basically allow FEMA to put together what the resources and what the guidance is for expending those funds. So the guidance from the Disaster Relief Act 2019 was received from FEMA, and this was critical for us in order to move the projects forward. So a lot of what we've been waiting on was that guidance, as well as our cost escalation factors for projects, and we've received all of those. So we're right now at a point where we believe we can open the floodgates and start moving forward on all of our projects, those projects that are for critical facilities, and overall all of the recovery projects that we've been waiting to move forward on that will bring relief to the residents of the territory. Thank you.
And just one last thing, sir, Mr. Cooper, Director. How is employee morale at Walker right now? I understand that employees get accosted when they're going to the grocery store, people asking why is my power going out every day. How is that affecting our morale? Because these are critical personnel that we rely on every day.
Yeah, we have wonderful employees, and they continue to work, very hard, as was evidenced by some of these outages, particularly in the plants. So they continue to work very hard. We've got 3 labor unions, and their contracts have been expired for a number of years now. So that, to me, is having a bigger impact on morale than sort of these issues. Because like I said, our employees still come in and work hard every day, and I really need to thank them for that. But I think the morale issues are more related to some of the union negotiations.
Thank you. I just wanted, before we adjourn this week's press briefing, I wanted to go on record to address something. One of the key priorities of the administration is stabilizing and restoring the trust of the people in their government. The governor mentions that quite frequently, and it is one of his main priorities. As Director of Communications, I view the media as a partner in this effort to communicate to the public what the government and this administration is doing on their behalf. This weekly Government House press briefing is part of that effort. The media is invited to all of these press briefings, and I want to thank you all for attending. This is our 4th one, and you've all have attended all of the briefings that we've had thus far. And so I just want to say I understand that there will be times where some individuals have scheduling conflicts and people can't make every Monday at 1 to 1:30, and that's precisely why we have this streaming on social media so that folks could cover it from their desks, and this is why that it's aired on the Government Access Channel so that the wider viewing public can get this information. And so I just wanted to put that on the record, and again, thank you all for coming. See you all next week, September 23rd. Thank you and have a great weekend.